Welcome and thank you for joining me for this mini introductory course where I'll be sharing with you some of the benefits of using an abacus-based approach to math, which is really exciting, new for many of you. And I'll also be leaving you with some tips that will help you develop strong math skill and math strategy in your home for your really young kids. First, I'm going to start with what got me here. What led me to discovering the abacus and how did I discover it myself? No, I didn't spend any time abroad. It started with being pregnant with my twins. And not only was I pregnant with twins, I was pregnant with twin girls. And I am super sensitive to all the things built into our culture and our societal norms that tend to make girls a little more math anxious or less motivated to pursue the hard sciences. So I knew the statistics in terms of when girls stop pursuing math and stop being excited about math. And because I'm a teacher, I really wanted to avoid some of those things, and I wanted to make sure that I gave them a really strong option, a really strong foundation in math. So failure was not an option, and I don't qualify failure as not doing well. My definition of failure is when your child doesn't think that they can for some reason. If they approach any situation with I can, then there's a win. My takeaway, my tip is make sure you're really clear with what drives you. Make sure you're really clear with what your own motivation as a parent is and what you want to instill in your children. And maybe your drivers come from fear, as mine did. Maybe your drivers come from some type of inspiration, but be clear on that to make sure that the direction and the approach that you take with your children as it relates to your home education regimen is very precise and targeted. So why the abacus? What's the big deal? Many of us have heard about them, seen them, we perhaps maybe even dibble-dabbled with them, but unless you've really interacted with them, then there's a lot that we don't know about the abacus, but we do make a lot of assumptions about the tool. We assume that people who use it are strong in math, and typically, these assumptions are true. So I'll start with that. The abacus makes math meaningful. The way that the tool is designed, the way that the numbers are presented, the way that you move the beads allow for a really strong foundation. The other wonderful thing about the abacus is that you can start your children really early. You could start pre-writers. So if your kids are not holding a pencil properly and they can't write their numbers, you don't have to wait for them to develop those skills for you to introduce abacus-based math, because they can start doing calculations, 29 minus 8 plus 1 with an abacus without being able to write these numbers down. So they're great for your pre-writers. They help increase speed and accuracy when calculating and practicing on it. One of the things that I found most amazing when I was working with my daughters and we were learning the abacus together because it was a new tool for me was the mental and visual skills that it developed. How my children were able to imagine, as you can say, moving the beads and making those adjustments as they made calculations in their heads. It's great for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And it is hugely important for enhancing and sharpening mental skills and mind skills. The abacus requires children to use both sides of their brain, whereas traditional and typical approaches to math don't require children to use both sides of the brain. So that means they use a part that's very logical and regimented, and they use the portion of the brain that evokes imagination. So it's a great tool once you get to know it. So the tip is make sure you get an abacus. Make sure you get something that you can use and work with your child because it truly is worth it and it helps them develop math language in a way that is not typically taught here in America. So just a little bit of history about the tool, not much. The abacus was initially developed for merchants and traders who needed more than just their fingers and toes to calculate. They needed to calculate large quantities. And this was during a time and a period and a place in history where written numbers just didn't exist. So they needed something to calculate with their transactions. So they have come in many forms, many shapes, many sizes, many colors, as you see. Here's a more colorful one, and here's one that's a little bit more traditional, and that's a small, I guess, pocket abacus. And the smallest one that I've come across in my 5 or 6 years in working with them is this one that I purchased from a company in Japan, which is no longer in existence. So these tools are great, but yet there's something about them that still deters us or keeps us away from learning about them and understanding and even using them. And typically it's just because there's just so many components to it, right? What we don't need to worry about in this class is that you will be using, or I'll present the abacus with this tool that's in front of us. In reality, if you're starting with your 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old, you just need this set of beads right here, your units value, which takes you from 0 to 9. So your 2 or 3 or 4-year-old can start positioning beads on the abacus, counting beads on the abacus, doing addition and doing subtraction on the abacus, or even mentally from 0 to 9. So we don't need your tens, we don't need your hundreds, we don't need numbers in the thousands, and we definitely don't need numbers in the 10,000s. So my focus for this particular class in level 1 is just this unit right here, which is what we call the first rod. If your child masters the first rod, then obviously they also are mastering a pattern. They are able to relate 1 to 10 to 100 and 3 to 30 and 300. Pretty easy. So what I use in the course, I use a lot of animations. The animations look much like this, doing calculations and showing how the beads move. In addition, I also use real-time demonstrations so you can know. So you don't have to worry about the complexities that the abacus can bring, or the intimidation that this tool can bring, because trust me, I worked through this, I fought through this, I've gone through many lengths to kind of simplify the whole process for. So I'll introduce the typical versus the abacus approach. Generally, when teaching children how to calculate, I have an example here of 4 minus 2. We'll present kids with 4 items and we'll tell them to subtract 2 from that and count how many are left, and then they will count how many are left. The abacus approach is a bit simpler, which helps students master math a little more. In this example right here, you have an abacus that had 4, you took 2 away, the calculation was pretty easy. No using of fingers or hands. Students don't have to count items that would shift from an apple or a butterfly or an elephant. They would always see the bead, they would know the bead, and that bead will start to develop a muscle memory. So 4 minus 2 not only becomes how many apples minus 2, but then it becomes, oh yeah, I remember, I can envision 2 beads on my abacus. I take 2 away. I know I have 2 left. It helps students and children with a strong mental approach to math. More examples of your typical learning of math. Here you see students, I just captured this from one of the Common Core curriculum, early elementary, kindergarten. Kids would count how many butterflies, identify how many butterflies are there. Or in this example, kids would be tracing their numbers. My belief, and I've found that if your children can count butterflies and identify that they're 3, or if your children can trace numbers repeatedly, then they're ready for this level of math. This particular portion was pulled from a country in the East. It was pulled from one of their curriculum for their kindergartners. So starting school around the same age, American children are counting and tracing, whereas you have children from other regions of the world, they're going into the math, they're digging in, they're using the abacus. So the tip is, don't follow what's prescribed. Don't follow what the institutions prescribe. Generally, public schools in particular, they have a middle road, and they say that all children should be performing these skills. That's kind of at the middle road, and I'm being very gracious by saying middle road. And if your child can go faster, than that middle road, then they're slowed down. If your child doesn't go as fast as that middle road, then they're being left behind. So you decide what your child and where your child is in terms of math calculations and ability, and you develop their skills from there. Even if they go to school, that's the beauty of home education. So again, try not to follow a prescribed math curricula. Try to start your children calculating as early as possible. If they're talking, they can do math. There's an author, Malcolm Gladwell. If you're not familiar with him, you should be. I read his book not because I was looking for any particular parenting strategies or anything like that. I read his book because it was popular. It popped up on, New York Times bestseller or something. And I was interested because, I was just interested. I was listening to an interview on NPR and I liked what he had to say. But I never expected his findings and his research to relate directly to the decisions that I made as a parent and as a home educator in terms of what I was doing with my children at home. But there are a couple of points that I pulled from this book that just changed my whole way of thinking in terms of what I wanted to do with my girls, why, and how. One of the things was languages give certain advantages in math. So, depending upon what language you're raised speaking, that's going to decide if there are barriers to math or if you have an easier facility with math. The other thing that he focused on was hours of practice. I always thought of hours as practice as hours in a day. If my child does 2 hours of this or 1 hour of that or 3 hours of that, then they would benefit. But it really is dependent upon your child's age. Starting them in something early and remaining consistent has a super benefit to them versus trying to drill and kill a certain, whether it is activity or a certain academic skill, hours on. So the tip is start early. Since this is a math focused lecture, my opinion is to start math early, be consistent, practice it daily. But whatever you've decided that you want your child to be good at or excel in, make sure you start them early. Don't wait for them to become 9 or wait for them to become 13. Start as soon as they are capable or as soon as they are ready to begin with whatever skill it is that you are presenting or helping. So, Robert Gladwell's talking about languages hold us back. In particular, English is a language that holds us back. I was looking at an article in the Wall Street Journal by Sue Schellenbarger. And if you look at this quote, it says, confusing English word names have been linked to several recent studies to weaker counting and arithmetic skills in children. This pulls from exactly what Gladwell was saying. In our language, we have some barriers that make things a little bit more difficult in math, and in some people's languages, those barriers don't exist. English is definitely a language that takes away an advantage, and you have Japanese and Mandarin and other languages that add some facility to math. So I use this example, and I also pulled from the same article in the Wall Street Journal this literal translation of what numbers sound like in English versus in other languages. So if you look at English, we say 17, for example. So if I start from counting from 8, I would say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. After 10 comes 11. What does 11 really mean? Like literally, it's unclear, right? So it is a word name that is not very specific to what it is representing. And we know 17, we know what number 17 represents because we've been acculturated to saying 17 and identifying 17 with 17 items or objects. But the reality is, what does 17 really mean as compared to in Chinese? I'll start with 8 again. So in Chinese, the literal translation of their number or counting would be 8, 9, 10, 10, 1, 10, 2, 10, 3, 10, 4, 10, 5, 10, 6, 10, 7, 10, 7. A 1 in the tens place, a 7 in the ones. That makes sense. That is the literal meaning. So within the language, they're logical calculations, which give children learning to count in those languages more of an advantage. Um, let's say in Japanese, I'll do literal translation starting from 17. It'd be 10 7, 10 8, 10 9. Two tens, 2 10 1, 2 10 2, 2 10 3, 2 10 4, 2 10 5, 2 10 6, 2 10 7. Again, it makes sense. This is the type of thing in the full class that I want to present to parents and I want to show you. I want to make sure that when we're approaching math at home, whether it's an abacus-based math or not, whether you register for my class or not, but I want to help you with ways to think about how we approach math. I want to pull some research and things that might be barriers within our culture, within our society, from our children performing in math the way that they are in many other countries. I want to I'm bringing all of this to the full class. So you're not just taking this singular approach of, hey, John, this is how we're going to approach math. We're going to do an abacus approach, but we have some whys. We have a backdrop that you have a really good understanding of some of the things that get looked over when we're not completely aware of what we're doing or why or what's around us and why. So the tip is to teach your child how to count logically. In the full class, I give examples, I demonstrate how, I go through why, I give examples and strategies and all kinds of things that can be done because it is very important that our children approach math and give them a benefit or an edge that other children have in other regions of the world. So we know the abacus is great. We know it helps with mental calculations. We know that it's logical. We know that it links muscle memory to addition and subtraction. It's been established as an excellent tool. You just Google abacus, abacus learning, abacus math learning, and you'll find all this research that has been done that helps support how children who learn to use the abacus when learning to do math just have an upper hand. So what's the issue, right? These tools are excellent, but what's the issue? So there are a few issues. They're generally for older learners. They're also for learners raised in a culture and environment where they've used the abacus, their mom, their grandfather, their grandparents. So it's readily available. It's not as foreign or it's not this unique device. We know, but it has a lot of parts and pieces that many of our younger learners don't need and actually serve as distractions. And typically that's the reason why people don't go near them. You hear about them, you know they're great, you know there's something to them with connection with math development, but people don't go near them, which is why I've been working to develop a simpler way that offer the same benefits as the full tool, but there has to be a simpler approach. People do things more when there's a simpler way, an easier avenue in getting there. So I've created this variation of an abacus. I call it the junior counter. Um, I've worked on this. I had younger kids, and they're 7 now. So for the past 4 years, we've been working with an abacus, and we've had our trials and tribulations. So I know that this tool could be of much benefit. It's made a little larger with larger frames and larger beads to help children identify the numbers a little more. It's adaptable. That means that as your child progresses, you can add pieces which add place value. So you'll start off with 0 through 9, and then you add a piece to it, and it goes from 0 to 99. It's perfect for review if you need to go back to the ones. It's designed for smaller fingers with a little lip. It's excellent for homes with siblings of multiple ages, and it goes up to 199. So a video glimpse of the abacus is what it looks like. So some of you might fear or think, well, how is this abacus different from the traditional abacus? Or will my child get the same benefit from this tool as they would using a traditional abacus? And the answer is yes. If you Look at the abacus. My junior counter has the same frames. The bead placements and the number of beads are the exact same. The rods are definitely placed the same way, except the junior counter doesn't have excess. The junior counter was developed for kids with little fingers. The junior counter was developed to grip for no sliding, for the beads not to move when a child holds their tool up and says, "Look, Dad, look what I did." When you're across the kitchen doing something or cooking, because kids always want to show you what they've done. So in your traditional abacus, if you move it, as most of you know, the beads will move as well. In addition to the class, I also have some books, books that were designed to help you with each of the levels of the abacus. So it's called the Mathematician Junior, just as a class, and I take you through the same levels in the class, in the full class, as I do the book. But it helps young children master the abacus. It helps young children and their parents with how to use. So the Mathematician Junior online class levels and the textbook workbook levels correspond. Level 1 of the workbook and level 1 of the online class will take you through how to position beads, how to count beads, add and subtract numbers. We go through numbers 0 through 4 initially, level 1A, so your child gets very specified practice on just 0 through 4. And then we move on to 5, which is the first kind of abstract number on the abacus where one bead is representative of multiple, of several numbers. And that's level 1B, and 1B is dedicated just to 5, and you'll see why. But that leads to a very smooth transition to working from 1 through 9 in level 1C. So a similar pattern comes up when you move on to level 2, except we go through from numbers 10 to 99 with varying levels, focusing on the varying numbers within that level as well. And the last level, level 3, which does the same, but we focus on numbers 100 to 999 with a particular focus on 500. These three initial levels in level 1 are all calculations done without regrouping. But by the time your child is finished with level 1, for example, they will be able to count on an abacus, add on an abacus, subtract on an abacus, and count, add, and subtract from 0 to 9 mentally as well. Is register for the course. See what it's about. See how I teach. See what strategies I introduce to you. See how I make them simple. Most of all, how your child's performance in math increases. I want to also talk about what the course offers. It's a simple approach, nothing to fear. It's not a class to teach you how to take the class. It's a class that helps demonstrate and introduce the abacus in a really family-friendly and parent-friendly way. I offer explainer videos. Some are animated, as you've seen in a few slides previous. And I also offer real-time explainer videos where you actually see my finger moving the beads, or some of the videos have my children's fingers moving the beads as well. Uh, Along with the class, you'll have some free downloadable practice sheets, which will be hugely beneficial. So if you and your child go over a skill, then you can print out a practice sheet that goes along with that skill. I'm also offering two discounts. 15% discount if you are interested in buying the workbook, and a 50% discount on the prototype of the junior counter. It hasn't been brought to full-scale production yet, but I have prototypes because I'm always looking for more feedback as I go through this process of discovering methodologies, functionalities that make this tool easier, more beneficial for kids. And I love to connect with people. I love to talk to you about your journey, or if you're having any challenges or you don't even know where to start. So a free 30-minute web-based consultation where we can see each other via Skype or Zoom, and we could just talk it through with where you are or any questions that you have. So let's go get back over these tips. Make sure if you want your child to win in math that you realize what drives you. You figure out what drives you. You take a moment to think about, what is my motivation? Why am I doing this? Why do I want to do this? That's going to help you have a laser focus on what you want your end result to be. You want to make sure you have the right tools. As I indicated, some abacus, many on the market, just have so many distracting features and characteristics. I suggest you purchasing the junior counter, which is in its prototype, and it's a great time to buy it now because it's in its prototype phase. Don't worry yourselves about following a certain curriculum. Maybe you need to slow it down, or maybe you need to scale it up. But these prescribed curriculum are for the average, they're for the middle. So you need to find out where your child fits. Perhaps your child fits in the middle and that's a perfect place for them, or maybe they're ahead or a little bit behind. But you, as a parent, make that decision in terms of where they should be in math and what they should be focusing on in training in math. Um, Teach your kid to count logically. That is so important. I cannot emphasize how that helped. In the level 1 mathematician course, I'm going to introduce strategies for that because it becomes hugely important, especially for your younger learners. And start early, be consistent, and please register for the class. See what I have to offer and give us a try. Would like to say thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this presentation not only helpful, but I hope it's kind of increased your curiosity for learning an abacus approach to math, and you can register for the class at www.mathjunior.org. Again, thank you for your time and all the best.